all women engaged in actual field labor. When some other parts of the region 7 to 8, which actually states the value in which women were held within the region in terms of their ability to actually produce cotton and other products. And also, we have noticed, as Gail Summers has noted many times, that slavery in the Bahamas was not considered as labor intensive as it was in other parts of the region. And I just have a quote here, according to Pascal, he would rather be a slave in the Bahamas than a poor free cottager in England. This again is significant to the historical and the perpetual meaning of slavery at that particular time and the conditions upon which our slaves endured in the Bahamas. With reference to domestic tasks, it ranged from cooking to personal servants, nursemaids. And the rich information that we have from Pakistan, which was a plantation on in San Salvador, it allows us to see that women actually went from one role to the other on a daily basis. So one day she may be in the kitchen cooking, another day she may be assisting another female in work. So the roles themselves were multiple and change from day to day. And of course, I would suppose to say in terms of what that means today, we do know that many women on a daily basis actually engage in multiple roles. You are not just a mother, you are not just a wife, you're not just an employer or an employee. You're actually able to actually engage in multiple tasks on a daily basis. With reference to work assessment from the woman's perspective, women were viewed as profitable bodies. They were, with reference to slavery, they were genderless. The only thing that was important was the ability for one to actually produce whatever was being asked of them. So her first and foremost job was the work of her master, and incidentally, wife, mother, and housemaker came later. So basically what we had here happening was the fact that even though women were involved in the institution of slavery, they still had to take care of themselves and make a life that was more or less one that was satisfactory and was allowed within the confines of slavery. Women, again, considered more proficient than men. And if you look at the statement that is being used here with reference to women, according to McKinnon, at the time of gathering in the crop, which was performed with more dexterity by the women than the men, one lusty female slave with a child upon her back gathered between 40 to 50 pounds for each day's work. Statements such as that redefined who the black woman was, with reference to the fact that she was able to care for her child while in the field and actually being able to produce such a high product compared to her male counterpart. And so oftentimes the views of black women were actually redefined within modern society, and again by aggressive men, because women at this time, European women, their counterparts, were considered pious. They were not considered to do dominion tasks. Whereas women, slave women, proved themselves that yes, we are able to actually produce. We're also able to take care of our children. And the next statement with reference to our counterpart, this was taken from an account in Mississippi. If you look at the language that is being used, 40 of the largest and strongest women ever saw together. Their legs and feet were bare. They carried themselves loftily, each having a hoe over the shoulder and walking with a free, powerful swing, like chasseurs on the march. The language in itself lets us know that these women were considered to be a brigade that was strong, that were able to actually work together cohesively, but work as though they were men. And again, black women from this perspective here were viewed as individuals who were actually able to perform tasks that, again, our counterparts were not able to perform within the confines of slavery. The next aspect in terms of slaves life focused on family. And within the region, we realized that new family traditions emerged as a result of slavery. And this was completely different from some African societies, because within African societies, we do realize that women's role were based on regional dispersion. It was also based on religion. But however, all women, all black women in the Western world as a result of slavery actually were turned the same. And we had, for the first time, black female single parent, even though we contend that in the Bahamas, most plantation owners preferred nuclear families. We do know that in some instances, there actually were single female parents. And within the family life, women began again to emerge themselves more because children were more associated with their mother as opposed to their father. So in traditional households where women were considered assistant to men, it actually reversed itself, where men became assistant and almost secondary to the woman. Because even though she may have been in the field as a laborer, within the home, she actually had the ability to emerge as a dominant force within that household, simply as a result of her responsibility in terms of cooking and caring for her children. Referring back again to slaves in terms of monogamy, again, we know that masters controlled exactly what slaves did and what slaves did not do. Farquharson, for example, one of his female slaves actually became impregnated by a neighbor slave. So to him, it was only right that she would marry him. So again, whether or not she wanted to marry him was out of her control. So within slavery, even though her actions may have been her own to choose her mate, the fact was the ultimate goal was of her master that yes, you would marry this gentleman here. And again, records indicate that within the Bahamas we maintain mostly monogamous relationships. But again, records are ambivalent, they are somewhat scanty. But it is safe to say that this happened, and the phenomenon of female single parent really did not begin to emerge until the 1950s. And that, I think, as contemporary researchers, is a cause for concern, but also it's one to explore research in between the gap. What happened to the existence of the nuclear family and to the emergence of predominance of the female single family within our society. Social death, because underneath slavery, families were fragile. Fragile because masters could sell children away from their parents and wives away from their husbands. Within the Bahamas, it was very unlikely that women were separated from their children, and even so as families. If something was, for example, one of Wiley's slaves attempted to escape, he actually sold the entire family. So as opposed to our sisters within other regions in the Caribbean region or North America where individuals were separated families, most families in the Bahamas were sold as units, and that in itself is a unique construct within the terms of slavery. However, many persons saw the separation of family worse than death, because within slavery, that is the only thing that you have, your family, after being working from sunrise to sunset in some instances. The only thing you have is your family, and that, of course, is taken away from you. And so it was considered to be social death. The male role. The male role within slavery for the black man was one of emasculation. The mother's role, again, was predominant. And the multiple roles that she engaged in would have been caring for her elderly, because we do know from our records that most Bahamian slaves, once they became older, especially women, their job and responsibility was really to take care of younger children. Also, for slave children, this was essential because this is a return to the past where we have in Africa a family raising children, the extension of family. So within the slave community, we actually had younger persons leaving their children with older family members, and of course, younger members taking care of their elder relatives. Again, this was more the responsibility of the females as opposed to the men. So in addition to going out to work in multiple roles, one was also responsible for keeping that unit together. There was also domination of specific activities in terms of deciding what would happen in the household from a female's perspective and preparation of the food, because again, it was more matriarchal. Men were considered an assistant, a companion, a sex partner. And it was often thought of a woman's mate as something of possession, Lizzie's island, as was the house in which she lived. So we saw where women again emerge. And I think this is essential for us to really revisit this in terms of where we are as women today. Many women tend to see themselves, or women in general, are seen as they are self-sufficient. They are strong. But if you look at the history and the lineage of where we would have come from, in African societies, women were able to control political governance. They actually were able to advocate for themselves. Many women actually were able to hire, or what was called hire a bride, which performed the services of someone who was actually married. And we also know that certain traits, not only genetic traits in terms of biological being, other traits tend to transfer from generation to generation. So self-sufficiency, the ability to actually make decisions, would have transferred more than likely from mother to daughter or from grandparent to child. So in bringing it into the Western world, we actually would have had these traits transferred. And so today's woman that we see that is actually educating herself, running her own household, running her finances, the multiple role is a nexus to the past. And it's not something that should be viewed negatively, but something that should be embraced. And so it's definitely essential for us to go back to the past and to make the connection and to look for the significance within the phenomena of being a black Bahamian woman and being a society that is predominantly black. Yes, African families too. Many African cultures from which slaves came were, again, like I said, matrilineal, or they are matrifocal. So this existence of the woman being the head of her household